Hello and welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to be talking about forms with PHP. In our previous video we installed XAMPP, which is a software or an Apache software that lets us run our PHP code on our local machine. If you haven't installed this already, please feel free to watch the previous video and come back to this one where we get started on coding the actual PHP. Now let's say you've already got it installed, let's carry on. So the first thing I'm going to do is start my Apache server. Of course, this will let us run our PHP code. As you can see, nothing has showed up, nothing in red, which means we are good to go. Now to create a PHP application that will run with our Apache server, we need to head on over to our installation of XAMPP. So I installed mine under C, XAMPP. Yours by default should be this unless you've changed it in the installation. But head on over to this folder and then head on over to htdocs. Here you can add all your PHP projects. I'm going to create a new folder and call it PHP mini course. Feel free to call it whatever you want. Now, the software I'm going to be using to write our PHP code is going to be VS Code. VS Code is an IDE developed by Microsoft, and it is free. So if you want, you can install it. Personally, I find it to be one of the best IDEs, or text editors, whatever you want to call it. There are many other softwares online that you could use to code, but I'm going to be using VS Code as it is personally one of my favorites, and it's also one of the most popular ones. So, heading over to VS Code, I'm going to open up the folder. So I'm going to click on File, Open Folder, and I'm going to navigate to the XAMPP, htdocs, and then the folder we just created. Select folder. Now before we get started, if you're using VS Code, I recommend you do this. Head on over to your extensions panel and look up PHP and install this one here. You don't need it, but it's a quality of life thing. And you can see here from the very small description, it provides IntelliSense, debugging, formatting, code length, and a couple other extensions to read about below. Now going back to our folder directory, I'm going to create a new file called index.php. Here is where we're going to run all of our PHP code. Now to make sure that our PHP is running successfully, I'm going to quickly run some test code. Let's check one more time that our Apache server is running. Yes. Now we can head on over to our browser and type in localhost / and then the folder name. For me it's PHP mini course. And we click enter. Hello world is displayed. Perfect. That tells us that everything is set up correctly. Now, let's go and work on some forms. Now, a neat thing we can do inside of VS Code is when we type exclamation mark and click enter, it will generate this very basic HTML template. This saves us writing a little bit of code. So I'm going to be running that, and I'm just going to call this forms. Now, inside of our body, let's create a simple form. Now, to create a form, you surround a form with form tags. Pretty self-explanatory. And inside of these, you will then add inputs. Inputs are things that, well, the user can input that can then be submitted. For an input, it's going to need a type. Now the type, it can vary. You can have all of these different types. Like over here, you've got buttons, checkboxes, colors, dates. But the one we're going to start off with is text, which is the most simplest one. The next thing you usually want for an input is to put a name for it. Here I'm going to put first name. Then you'd usually want some sort of ID of sorts, so I usually like to call that the same thing as well. And now you have a very valid input that we can now use inside of our PHP document. If we head on over to our website and reload it, you can see this box show up, where we can now type in stuff into the input. Now, we obviously cannot submit it yet, which is the next thing we're going to do. This is another kind of input. You might have spotted it before when we were scrolling through here, but it's a type of submit. This will now allow us to submit our form upon clicking this button. But obviously, when we submit our form, how is the code going to know what to do with it? Now, when we click the submit button, you can see nothing happens. Well, actually, something does happen. Our URL gets updated with a question mark, first name is equal to, and then nothing. Now, what if I put something like Mike in here and click submit? Now we have first name is equal to Mike. Now, this is because by default, a form sends GET request. So when you click the submit button, it will send a GET request with all of the input fields, with all the input data, as a query added on to our URL. That's why we see something like this, but we're still on the same page. This is good for many things, but personally with forms, you should be using post requests. Yes, you can use gets, but posts are mostly recommended. This is due to their safety and it being a standard. To make our form a post request, inside of our form tags, we just simply type in method post. Now, if you got a glimpse of it there, we can also get a get here, which will do the exact same thing. If I refresh the page and type in Mike, actually let's try a different name, so John, and submit, it does the exact same thing. Now what happens when we do a post request? If I type in Mike, submit, the URL doesn't change anymore. If I get rid of this to make it a little bit easier, nothing changes. Nothing actually happens. But under the hood, what has happened is the form was submitted and set as a post request, but we don't have anywhere to send it. So the form does work, it's just it's not getting taken anywhere. This is where we put an action. Now our action will be the following. Form. What this means is that upon clicking the submit button, it will take us to the form.php page. Now, at the moment, we don't have a form.php page. So if we run this again, and say Mike, it will just give us a 404 not found. But as you can see in the URL, we are now redirected to PHP minicourse /form.php. So let's quickly create that here. Form.php. Inside of this file, we can now get the data that was sent through the post request and manipulate the data or do whatever we want with it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to get the data and I'm going to print it out. So start off by opening up my PHP tags. And inside of them, we're going to run an if statement. This if statement is going to be used to check if there has actually been a post request sent. So to do that, we say if underscore server, $_server, square brackets, and inside of a string, we do request underscore method is equal to post. This checks if there has actually been a post request sent. Now inside of the curly braces, we can now get our form data. So if we go back to our index.php, what do I send? I get a first name, so $first name, because I want to save it as a variable, and you run $_ post with our first name, which is what our ID is. This should now get whatever we were inputted inside of that form into this first name variable, which we can then echo out. So if we go back to our index page here, and we input something like John, and click submit, now we get John back, and we have been redirected to our form.php page, which means the data was sent as a post request, and we were able to get it and print it out. Now while we're here, let's just quickly mention over some security features. This code here can be quite unsafe due to cross-site scripting. Cross-site scripting is a security vulnerability where an attacker injects malicious JavaScript into a web page that other users view. Basically, it lets someone run their own code inside of your site, often to mess up your website visually, or redirect users to fake pages, or steal session tokens, etc. To prevent this, we surround this post with HTML special chars. What this will then do is convert anything into HTML. So displaying it won't cause any issues, because whatever is inside of these HTML special chars won't actually execute. Like if I was to run JavaScript inside of that input, the JavaScript would actually execute instead of just being printed. But now this lets us convert that into valid HTML, which will prevent any of that cross-site scripting. This is a security feature that you should be implementing only if you're going to be printing out whatever's been posted by the form. Now then, if I submit the same form again, you'll see technically nothing has changed because we aren't really injecting anything malicious. But if an attacker was to inject something malicious in here, it would stop that from happening. So that's the basics of HTML forms and PHP forms. Now let's just add a little bit more to our form. What we can do is we can add a last name. We can also add a date, maybe a birth date. And maybe some sort of checkbox. Now when we go back to our website, you can see all of these different inputs. Now, it does look pretty ugly, but they're here. Let's worry about the functionality before the styling. So, the first input is our first name. So let's do Mike. Our next input is our last name. So, Spencer. Here we put our birth date. Let's do yesterday. because why not? And then our next checkbox is married. Now, that's just the visual stuff. Let's actually print that out. We'll be doing the same thing as we did before inside of our form.php with the new form values. So now we have last name. So we get our last name. We also get a date, or date of birth, which will be our birth date. I'm pretty sure that's what I called it. Make sure. Yes, it is. Feels weird. Let's put that as birthday as well. And then we also got married. Make sure I got that right. Yes. And now we can print all of these out. So last name, birth date, and married. Heading back over to our form, when I click submit, we get all of this. Mike, Spencer, then the date selected, and on. Very nice. Now if you noticed, I forgot to wrap this in special chars as well. Even though a user might not be able to input any JavaScript code in here, because we haven't specifically allowed them to through our HTML, a malicious person could do something like this. If you open up your DevTools by clicking F12, I know this has made it look a little bit different, but if we head on over to our form, this is the exact same code as we have here. Where's my, there it is. So, even though we have a type of box, a type of date here, sorry, an attacker can still change this type of text. And now all of a sudden, someone could type in whatever they want in here. This is why no matter how much security you can put in the HTML by putting stuff like required and minimum and maximums, anyone could just go and click F12 and edit it. That's why you should always validate it inside of your form.php and always run security checks. That's why even though before, if I refresh, you can't type in any characters, you can type in numbers, but you can't type in characters. A malicious person or a malicious attacker can easily change it like that. Same with the checkbox, even though it sounds silly. Look at that. Now a checkbox, we can type in something in. So make sure you have these HTML special chars in just for that extra security. The final thing I want to go over before the end of this video is some extra things you can add as your input tags. So what I mean by that is we've already got stuff like type, name, and ID, which are like the base standard that you're going to need for your input. But we can add some extra things. Very common things are stuff like required, which means you are not allowed to submit the form if the field is empty. Another very common one is placeholder. As you noticed before, we have two inputs that have nothing shown. How is the client supposed to know what you're supposed to type in here? Obviously you can put something in above it, like a p tag saying first name, but we can just put it inside of him. So by that, we use the placeholder where we can type in first name. Now as you can see, first name shows up, so the user knows what to input. Now I can add this to our second input like I just have here. Now on a refresh, we've got first name, last name, our date, and our checkbox. When we click on submit now with no data, before, if we ran this, everything would submit with empty fields. But now, it will give us an error, or a warning. Please fill in this field. This might look different depending on what browser you're using, but each browser will display a warning like this. So I will say Mike. Now if I click submit, all of a sudden, the last name now gives us this warning. So then let's fill in this field and click submit. Now, all of a sudden, we have an issue. Undefined key array key married. This is because it wasn't selected when we submitted it. As you can see, it's not selected, and when we click submit, it will give us this warning. But if I click it, all of a sudden it works. This is because of how it just works. So if you have a checkbox, you should have something like this. This just says, find the married in our post. If you can't find it, just make it an empty string. Because for a very odd reason, if you don't actually select the checkbox, it actually just doesn't seem to post it. Not sure why, but now if I don't post it, I need to fill in these properties again. It works fine and doesn't display anything. That's just a little tip for you guys. Now, feel free to experiment. You've got all of these different properties you can add onto your inputs. There's a lot. There is a lot. So experiment with them. These ones I showed you today are very basic and some stuff that you might need. I hope this video wasn't too long, but I wanted to get in and make sure we get forms down, as I feel like the whole point of PHP is to work with forms in one way or another. So making sure you know at least how forms work correctly with some different types of inputs will get you going for the next following episodes. So, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure you leave a like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.